Last week, I shared how I composited together a bunch of different images to create one photo of the Perseid Meteor Shower. A couple of people commented that at that point, what I was sharing wasn't a photo at all, but was digital art. So join me as I talk about where I draw that line between photography and digital art and what I think is acceptable in photography. Welcome to Grant Takes Pictures. I'm Grant, and I take pictures. My goal when taking and sharing photographs is simply to create beautiful things to put out into the world. It's as simple as that. I'm not trying to represent capital T truth, and I'm not a photojournalist. So this question of what is photography and what is not, what is photography and what is digital art, is kind of a pointless question. And telling photographers that their work is no longer photography because they've made edits to it, I think is destructive to photography as an art form. That we need to be supporting people and saying, if the end result is something pretty, or if it communicates something and moves us in some way, that is the goal of art. And whether we call it photography or call it digital art doesn't really matter. There are some photographers who say that any digital manipulation of an image makes it so that image is no longer a photograph and it becomes digital art. I'm not one of those photographers who subscribes to that view of photography. Any sort of digital photography requires some manipulation of an image. Whether it's setting the white balance to a sunny day or to cloudy or tungsten or whatever other options the camera offers, or setting a temperature value for that white balance, those are all options that the photographer has to change the look of the image. Whether that's happening in the camera or it's happening later in post-production on the computer, it doesn't really matter. That is all part of photography. And this was even the case when photographers were using film. Film photographers can change the look of their images in many different ways through all of the different decisions they have to make while creating that photo. Starting with the film stock they use, a Kodak film looks different than a Fuji film. Even within Kodak, Portra looks different than Kodak Gold. Each line of film has a different look. And then from there, the way they expose the image, the way they develop the film, and then the way they print it and enlarge it. Even when it's a completely analog process, the photographer can make decisions that change the look of the final image. When it comes to digital photography, the options are obviously much greater on what you can do to an image. You can push and pull the highlights and the shadows. You can change the saturation of each different color differently. You can make things brighter or darker. You can make your greens look more yellow or more blue. You can do all of these different things in a digital process, which you might not have been able to do all the same things in an analog process. But overall, we're talking about differences in degree of the way a photographer makes changes to their image, not differences in the types of changes they can make to an image. It would have been quite possible for me to shoot those meteor images on film and then in the enlargement process to composite them together. It would have taken more work and quite a bit more skill than what I have, but it would be possible. These types of manipulations with film are evident throughout the history of photography. A great example is Ansel Adams' photo of moonrise at Hernandez, New Mexico. If you look at the early prints from the early 1940s of that image, you can see a much flatter image. The shadows aren't as dark, the highlights aren't as bright. But if you compare it to an image taken much later, or an image printed much later from the same negative, if you look at something from the 1970s, the blacks are blacker, the whites are whiter. Just the contrast is much greater in the image. And that was all done in a completely analog process. The only times there's really any hard and fast rule about what is an acceptable edit in photography is when it comes to photojournalism. In photojournalism, generally speaking, photographers should not be editing their photos. They should be taking the photos, and what the photo shows is what the photo shows, and they shouldn't be making changes to it. Not only are there those basic edits to color and to the exposure that photographers need to make in a photojournalism setting, but there's editorial decisions that the photographer makes while taking the photos. What to include in a frame and what not. How to set two subjects against one another within the frame to show, whether it's, conflict or whether it's cooperation or, just the relationship between two things that communicates the story that they're trying to tell. In my own photography, this has been evident when I was out at the Black Lives Matter protests. One of the things I took a lot of pictures of were the police presence at these protests, because there were protests against police actions. And to me, that was the interesting part of the story from a photography point of view. So when I was out in Newport Beach at the protests there, I took quite a few photos of the riot gear clad police standing watch over this peaceful protest. That was an interesting part of the story to me, but that was an editorial decision. And a different photographer might have made different decisions on what to take a picture of. That simply by taking a picture doesn't mean that you are representing the truth of what is going on. And as the consumer of photography, as somebody who views photography, just all of us, many of us experience the world through photography, whether it's in the news or in social media or anywhere else. We are experiencing what is going on around us through photography a lot of the time, and we need to be asking ourselves, what are the photographers trying to tell us? What are they communicating by the images that they're taking, and what are they leaving out from those images that might be relevant to our point of view? So simply by saying that photography should represent truth and what actually happens, and that anything else is some type of digital art, really dismisses much of what a photographer does in both presenting information and deciding what information to present. So for me, going back to the original question of whether editing photos is digital art or whether it is still photography, my view is that it is all photography. That even when you edit a photo, it is still a photo. And there's a huge gray area between photography and digital art, where the more a photograph is edited and changed, the closer it becomes to digital art. And where each photographer and each consumer of photographs draws that line between photography and digital art comes at a different place, and it's something that we each need to decide for ourselves. I know that for me, I try to make relatively few edits to my images, that I try not to remove things from images or add things to them that weren't there. But my decision on where to draw that line between what is photography and what is digital art is kind of coterminous with where my skills are in photo editing. That as soon as a photograph no longer looks real, as soon as it no longer looks like it's something that I could have taken in the camera and something that could not exist in real life, that is where it stops being photography for me. But as my abilities at editing photographs improves, as I'm able to add things in or remove things from images and make it look real, maybe that line shifts. Maybe that line shifts more, so more things are included in photography for me than they are currently. At the end of the day, I think we each need to make a decision for ourselves where we think that line is between photography and digital art. But at all times, we need to be truthful about what we are presenting. I think at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, is that the photographer, the artist, needs to be honest about what they are showing the world. So if you've enjoyed this little diatribe about where the limits of photography are and what is photography versus what is digital art, hit that like button below. If you enjoy seeing me going out, taking photos and processing those photos and just trying to create beautiful things for the world, hit that subscribe button. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and until next week, have a wonderful time.